Welcome to this Complete Beginner's Whittling lesson. This video is part 3 in a series on carving this hatching chick. And this is what we were left with after part 2, and in this video we'll finish it off to this point here. So really what we're doing then is we're adding the texture to the feathers there at the top of the head, and then we're adding the eggshell on the bottom. So our learning goals for this lesson are that you will be able to use the tip of your knife to add fine details, and that you will develop blade awareness and make clean cuts. So what that means is that we're going to be carving fine details onto here in a way that's different from our first 2 beginner projects. And if you're just doing this one, that's fine, but if you've been viewing these all along, the first couple projects we did didn't include a lot of fine detail, and this is kind of going to be the first time we're adding fine detail on, which means I'm using just the tip of my knife. Now, the knife that I'm using is a 1.5 inch blade, and I feel pretty comfortable getting up to the top. It's got a nice skinny tip, look at that, for doing detail work. If you're fortunate enough to have a detail knife, a smaller knife just for details, this would be a great step to use it for. But if not, just use the tip of whichever knife you have. So the first thing we're going to do really is a series of V-cuts, pretty straightforward, right along this ridge. And the only thing that makes this a little bit challenging is that they're very small. So I'm just going to make a little notch right on the top of or right on the hard part of the ridge that we left there from the last video, and get that out of there, right? And really, that's all I'm going to do all the way across here is make some little tiny V-cuts. And now I'm not pushing very hard. You can see I even have my finger up here on the side of the blade to control it. So I'm being careful with the way that I'm doing that, and I'm really just using the very tip of it. Now, one thing to watch out for as you do this, and this was the second learning goal, is all about blade awareness, and that means knowing where each part of your blade is on every cut that you're doing. So in this case, it would be very easy for me to do this and then leave a nice line across the top of his head. So I need to be very aware that the tip of my knife is only going down exactly where I need it and no further, because if it goes any further, I'm going to be damaging the top of his head there, and that's not what I want to do. He wouldn't appreciate that either, probably being stabbed in the top of his head. Okay, so just a series of V-cuts, very small, across the top. It might be a little bit challenging going through the end grain there, but if you've got a sharp knife with a strong, skinny tip, you should be able to handle that well. Okay, so that's the first part. Now I've added those fun little feathers to the top of his head going across there. The second part is going to be carving this egg on the bottom. So I'm going to redraw a line, and it's easier if I start on the back here so I'm not thrown off by the beak, about 1/3 of the way up from the bottom, and that's going to represent where the top of the shell is going to go. I always like breaking things up into thirds. I am not an artist, but I know that the rule of thirds is just a pleasing way to set things up. So if you break stuff up into thirds, whether it's a picture you're taking or what you're carving, I'm always looking for that proportion if I can. So actually it looks like I drew it a little higher, but that's okay. Remember that the base of this was actually halfway up from my original piece, and so this probably is about 1/3. Now, the first thing I'm going to do before I start cutting these jagged edges for the egg is that I'm going to add a stop cut along here to just make the body go into the egg. So you can see that really well on this one. What I want is for that shape to come down into the egg and not just be aligned with the egg. It just gives a nice roundness to it. So you can see that here too. I want it to come into the egg. So I'm going to start by doing something we've done before, which is just a horizontal stop cut with a push cut going into it. Okay. And I'm going to follow that all the way around. Stop cut, push cut. Now, on this one, I really want to be careful not to go too deep with my stop cut. And the reason is that when I get to carving the triangles out to make that jagged edge of the egg, in some of these places, I'm going to cut this out, and we'll see it here in a minute, but if I go too deep, you'll start to see the stop cuts in ways that you don't want to when you're done. So ideally, your stop cut is just as deep as your push cut, and they're lining up exactly. But you can see that I'm still using just the tip of my knife here. If I wanted to make this really big, I would be back on here, and I would be taking really deep cuts. This is still kind of the fine detail stage of our carving. So I'm really choked up on the front tip of the knife here, making very small, deliberate, careful stop cuts and push cuts, so I'm not going too deep. Okay. And we're coming up here and making it all the way around, and there we are. Okay. So you can see we've defined the top edge of what's going to be the egg there. Now, what I'm going to do is, I still want to be careful about it, but I'm going to add some more cuts in here just to round the body off a little more. I like that round little shape. I just think that the way it tucks in here in the corner gives it a little bit more character. So I'm going to do the same thing, this time just going alternating in between the facets I just made, and a little bit higher up this time. And I still want to be careful with those stop cuts at the bottom so I don't get too far into them. And what I'm hoping to achieve is that I get kind of a center ridge. So look at the right side of this. I've got kind of a ridge at the center here alongside the beak where it's going up towards the top and in towards the bottom here. You can see on the left side where I haven't gotten yet, it's a little bit wider. So that's what I'm going for, thinking about the shape that I'm going to have when I'm done. So just a little higher up, but leaving kind of a flat part here. It's not really flat because we already carved it, but leaving that there. And then putting some fresh, slightly deeper, still very careful, deliberate cuts into the top of the egg there. Okay. All right. So now I've got that shape that I want, where it's tucked in towards the bottom on both sides, and it's going to end up looking a lot more rounded off. So the last step is going to be adding these jagged edges of the egg shell. And well, I'm not going to bother drawing them because the exact shape isn't really necessary. Let's find an empty spot over here, and we'll start away from the beak where it's easy. And these don't have to all be the same. In fact, it probably looks better if they're not exactly the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make two cuts like this to make a little triangle that pokes down in there. And what I'm going to do is just the tip of my knife, very carefully, I'm going to push straight in. And I want to, ideally what I'm doing is I'm pushing it as far in as that stop cut is going into the egg there. And then I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to make another one at an angle that lines up with it right at the tip there, and like that. Now I've got that little triangle there that I made, and I'm going to undercut it. I'm going to take the tip of my knife and cut right along the edge underneath it, and it should pop out just like that. If the first time you do it, it doesn't pop out like that, that's fine. Don't worry about it, it's going to take a little bit of practice, but I'm using just the very tip of my knife to cut that little triangle, and then if I need to shave that out at all, I can. Remember, don't pry, just repeat the cuts if you need to. So I'm going to make another one there, and one here, and then undercut to get it out. Okay. And we've got a whole bunch of those to make, so I'm going to keep doing that while I talk. And you might make one wider. Here's a nice, much wider one than the previous two I did. Like that. And I see a little bit of a piece I missed there, so I'm just repeating the cut to bring it out. And now this is what I'm talking about when I say we're developing blade awareness. There's a few things going on here that I'm kind of doing subconsciously at this point, but you really want to be thinking about. So when I do these straight cuts in, think about where the back of this blade is. Because if I'm holding the knife like this, I could all of a sudden just put a long gash in the side of this poor guy. He would not like that, and you would not like that. So I'm paying attention to the way I'm using the tip of that knife, but as I'm using the tip of the knife, I'm also paying attention to the long cutting edge to make sure I'm not rolling back on the side. And then I'm going to undercut it just like that. Yeah. So it's not just about being aware of where the tip is and not overcutting those obvious cuts in front of you. It's thinking about where's the back side of the blade and what's that going to be into. But the other thing you're developing on the tip of the blade is this sense of where is that tip. Even when it goes down into the wood, I'm kind of visualizing about how long that is. When I'm doing this undercut, think about this is what you want that knife to do there. So I'm not going to start like this and undercut, right? And then I'm going to take this all off and kind of visualizing the tip of that and where's it going to need to go to follow that line, even though I'm undercutting it. So this is, I think, really important to practice as a big beginner, is just over and over again doing something like this. It's a little bit tedious, but what it's going to do, it's going to help you get comfortable with just always being aware of where the tip is on your knife, but then also conscientious about not just where the tip is and visualizing that, but where the entire blade is and what cuts you may be making accidentally on the back. Okay. And what this is going to do is going to leave a really nice, it's going to make the eggshell look a little thicker maybe, which I think is good. It just adds a little bit more character to it than if it was really, really flat. Now this is where I'd point out what I said earlier about being really careful about the stop cuts that we did for the top of the egg here. If I did a really big stop cut here, and I'll just show you here, let's say my stop cut went in deeper, I would have a line that extended across back here, and it's just extra not clean lines, right? So if my stop cut was deeper than it needed to, what I would run into a lot here as I'm cutting these triangle out, it would be horizontal lines, markings running across there that I just don't need, adding unnecessary mess to my carving. So I am all about making those cuts as clean as you can the first time. Okay, and if you've got little chips there, you can see a couple little chips there. I'm just going to come back and I'm going to repeat the cuts that I made in order to get them out. I'm not going to pry them out. Okay, so I know that I probably make it look easier than it is. And this is not necessarily a simple thing if you're a brand new carver, but I think this is good practice. So if you're not getting super clean cuts on those triangles, it's fine. Practice it on a separate piece. Do a little stop cut and carve those little triangle chips out. Now, I'm going to do one more thing here before I finish it up, which is that these are kind of jagged edges, and I'm going to use the very tip of my knife. So again, fine detailing, and I'm going to just do a little shave off of that hard corner. And if I turn it around like this, I can do the shave off on the other side. And what that's going to do is just give me a little bit of a nicer looking shape here that's shaped a little bit more than just these jagged corners. So this is kind of optional. You don't necessarily have to do it, but I think it just adds a little bit, and it's a good example of using, again, just the very tip. You can see how much of that knife I'm using, just the very tip of it, in order to do that. And I'm thinking about, again, we talked about grain direction earlier. The grain is running vertically, so it's going to be easier for me to cut, kind of, in this case, I'm cutting up on the, towards the top, on these sides of the triangles. When I turn it around, I'm just doing the same direction like that. Okay, and it's going to be much easier for me to do this holding it upside down and going like that. And again, I'm being very aware of where's the tip of my blade. If I'm going too far deep here, I'm going to add extra cuts into here that I don't want. So I'm really just using the very tip of my blade to do that. So again, this is an optional kind of nice to have additional shaping element along the ridge of the eggshells here, but I think it adds a little bit. All right, so that's it. See how he compares to some of these other ones we have. I think that's pretty good. You might want to draw some little eyes on there, and I've intentionally made this super simple so you can just draw them. You don't have to carve them, and you just do your little happy arc eyes. Draw a little arc. Draw one on the other side. That's good. So let me just make a quick note about painting, because you're probably going to want to paint these, and I'll do a painting video in a little while, but just to cover all of the beginning projects. But as you're painting this, what I would suggest is that a toothpick works really well. Use a toothpick, dip it in black paint, and use that to draw the eyes on. And if you have trouble with that, you can just shave them off and then draw them on again. It's not a big deal. But the rest of the painting's pretty straightforward. You just do it carefully with a little brush. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this little project and have fun making these little hatching chicks. I will do one follow-up video where we carve the nest, and the nest is just a fun little addition to it. So if you want to carve the nest, you can watch that video, or you can just enjoy having the chicks as they are. So thanks for watching, and happy whittling.